My boy didn't just forget to pick me up from the hospital, he chose not to. So I rented a car, drove myself home, and when I got there, the locks had been changed. That's when I changed my will. If you're watching this, go ahead and hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I really want to know how far it spread. I didn't forget to come for you, Eleanor. I simply decided not to. So what? Let them roll your old body down the hall into the hospital morgue and leave you there. Honestly, every time I see you, I feel sick. I still remember the steady click of the hospital clock, each hollow tick like someone knocking at a door nobody planned to open. I was lying there, sore from gallbladder surgery, the four hissing beside me, a dull throb crawling under my ribs. Every breath dragged against the tight bandage around my stomach. The nurse had just told me I could go home. I nodded, pretended to be grateful, and reached for my phone. Out the window, the late autumn trees in Vermont stood like worn-out ghosts, their branches twitching in a wind that smelled like endings. I had called him 5 times, James Parker, my only son, my only child. First call, voicemail. Second, voicemail again. The third connected, then dropped. The fourth rang with no answer. On the fifth, he picked up. I barely said hello before his voice cut through, sharp and tinny against my ear. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. I didn't say anything. I didn't trust my voice. But I heard hers. Emily, my daughter-in-law, laughing behind him, that clipped, mocking laugh she used like punctuation. Why's she calling again? God, it's like having a zombie on speed dial. Smells the same too. James didn't correct her. He chuckled, that same condescending sound he used on telemarketers. Don't call us every 5 minutes like a lost dog. We're not your taxi, old woman. Then, click. The silence afterward was louder than the beeping of my monitor. I sat there, shaking, not just from the anesthesia wearing off but from something heavier, something final. The nurse came back with my discharge papers. She smiled kindly and asked if my family was on their way. I lied and said yes. I packed slowly, every movement tugged at the incision, like my own body resisted moving forward. I folded my nightgown into the small canvas bag and paused at the window. The parking lot below looked blurred, not from rain, but from what I refused to let fall from my eyes. Maybe he was just having a hard day. Maybe Emily had whispered her little poisons again. But somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't new. They hadn't simply stopped loving me. They had started resenting me. I called a taxi. The driver couldn't have been more than 20, nervous but polite. He helped me with my bag. When he asked if I was heading home to family, I just said no. He dropped me at the rental car office 3 miles from the hospital. My hand still trembled as I signed the papers. I slid into a 2011 Corolla that smelled faintly of old cigarettes and pine cleaner. The seat sat too low, the gearshift was stiff. Adjusting the mirror, I caught my own reflection. Pale, drawn, eyes ringed with gray. I looked like someone erased in pencil and never drawn back in. I drove on. The roads unspooled slowly through thinning trees. The sky sagged overhead like overripe fruit. My side ached with every bump, every turn. I kept the radio off. I didn't want music. I didn't want noise. I just wanted to remember, and I did. I remembered waking up at 4 a.m. every Christmas, rolling out dough in the dim kitchen lights so cinnamon rolls would be ready before James came pattering down the stairs in his footed pajamas. I remembered selling my engagement ring, the one Michael gave me after saving for 7 months, so James could cover his first semester of college. I remembered holding his hand while they set the bone in his shattered leg. And I remembered standing like stone at Michael's funeral, because my son needed someone solid. I remembered every bit of it. By the time I turned into our neighborhood, the daylight had already thinned, shadows stretching long across the sidewalks. Same painted porches. Same clipped hedges. Same warm glow spilling from windows that had no idea what rejection felt like. I pulled into the driveway of the house that used to be mine. The porch light burned steadily. Curtains drawn. Front steps swept clean. I climbed out, one hand clutching the canvas bag, the other pressed against my ribs. The key felt cold against my palm. When I pushed it into the lock, it wouldn't go. I tried again. And again. Nothing. I knocked once, then again. Movement flickered behind the curtain. James, I called, my voice barely louder than the breeze. For a heartbeat, silence. Then her voice, Emily's. Maybe then, I thought, the house would finally stop smelling like dust and regret. The porch light went dark. I stood there, the night pressing against me like a verdict. No coat. No home. No sun. I turned back to the car and drove away without a sound. I parked outside the only motel in town that still takes cash. The girl at the front desk barely looked up, handed me a key without a single question. I went to the room, flipped the lock, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall until my back stiffened from sitting so still. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't scream. I only whispered into the empty air. I see now. I see you both. And in that small, quiet room, with my stomach stitched up and my soul unspooling, I made a decision. I was going to change everything. I don't even remember the rain starting, only that it was already there by the time I turned onto my street. Not a dramatic downpour, just that slow, needling drizzle that slips down your collar and makes your bones feel borrowed, the kind of rain that whispers softly but clearly, "You're not wanted here." The windshield wipers dragged across the glass with a tired squeak, like they were as reluctant to keep going as I was. My hands gripped the wheel too hard. My palms were cold, my knuckles pale beneath skin that had once been firmer. Each bump in the road nudged the ache under my bandages. Then I saw it, the house. Familiar, yet strange. I had lived there for more than 40 years. It was where Michael carried me over the threshold, where James learned to ride his bike, scraped his knees, shouted with joy the first time he stayed upright. It was where I hemmed dresses. By the kitchen window. Where Michael planted the hydrangeas so blue they could steal your breath in June. Now the driveway was freshly paved. The porch railings newly painted. The welcome mat red, "Home is where the wine is." The hydrangeas were gone, ripped out and replaced with two perfect but fake topiaries. I pulled up to the curb, heart crawling into my throat. The engine ticked as it cooled. I shut it off but stayed sitting there, staring at the house I used to belong to. Lights glowed in the living room, the kitchen, the dining room. Shadows moved inside, people walking, talking. They were home. I reached for the door handle. My body hesitated. Everything hurt more after the drive. That dull surgical pull in my side. My thighs ached as I stood, the tightness biting deep, but I forced myself up anyway. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, pulled my coat tighter around me, and climbed the steps, slowly, one hand gripping the railing, each foot placed with care. My breathing came shallow, shaky. Halfway up, I had to stop, just to steady myself. When I finally reached the door, my door, I slid my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, tried again, jiggled it. Still nothing. I stared at the key like it had betrayed me. I'd owned that key longer than I'd had gray hair. It had worked last week. Last month. Then I noticed it. The new lock, bright, brassy, untouched by time. They'd changed it. My lips parted, but no sound came. I knocked 3 times, soft, just loud enough to rise above the drizzle. The sound felt small, almost embarrassed. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Then, a shadow moved behind the curtain. Someone was there. "James," I called, just above a whisper. "It's me." No answer. No footsteps. Then I heard her voice, Emily's, floating sharp and clear from an upstairs window. "You're not supposed to be here, Eleanor," she said. "You should have stayed in the hospital, or better yet, found yourself a nice retirement home where they hand out Jell-O and call you sweetheart." I froze. My hand stayed on the doorframe as rain soaked through my collar, running down my back like cold fingers. She kept going. "Honestly, the house smells better without you in it. Less mothballs, less martyrdom." Then she laughed. Not kindly. Not even amused. Just cruel. I turned back to the door and knocked again, harder this time. The movement pulled at my side, sharp pain under my ribs. "James," I said, louder now. "James." For a long moment, nothing. Then, movement. I saw him at the bottom of the stairs, just for a second. His walk. His shape. I'd have known them anywhere. He stopped right by the door. All he had to do was reach out, turn the knob, say my name. But he didn't. He turned away, disappeared back into the shadows. The porch light flicked off. I stood there for another minute, staring at the dark window, hoping, stupidly, that maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe that little boy who used to hold my hand in the grocery store would come back.
Maybe. No.
I stepped down, each foot heavy, the wet concrete slick beneath my shoes. My coat clung to me like regret. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat behind the wheel and stared at the house. Their house. They'd finally done it. They'd erased me. I backed out of the driveway, headlights sweeping across the front steps where Michael and I used to take family photos, where I once stood waving to neighbors with baby James on my hip. No one waved now. I drove past Laura's house, her curtains drawn, her porch light off. For a second, I thought about stopping, about knocking. But something in me had gone quiet. I didn't want comfort. I wanted clarity. The road curved out of the neighborhood, leading me back to the edge of town. The motel sign blinked faintly in the rain, the word vacancy flashing like a dying heartbeat. I pulled in. The girl at the front desk didn't ask my name, didn't ask anything. I paid in cash. She slid me a keycard and pointed down the hall. Room 212. Inside, I locked the door, once, then again. The air smelled faintly of mildew and a tired air freshener that had already given up. The bedspread was rough, the carpet thin. But it was mine for now. I peeled off my wet clothes, shivering as the cold clung to my skin like a second betrayal. I changed into the sweater they'd sent me home from the hospital in, the one that still smelled faintly of antiseptic, and sat on the edge of the bed. I tried to remember the last time James hugged me. I couldn't. The last time Emily smiled at me without that quiet poison behind it, I couldn't recall that either. The last time that house, my house, felt like it needed me, it had been years. And now, it didn't even recognize me. I sat there for a long time, no TV, no sound, just the soft glow of the cracked lampshade beside the bed. I whispered to no one. They changed the locks. Then, after a long pause, long enough for the hurt to turn into something sharper, I said, "So I'll change everything else." There's a certain kind of silence that sinks into you when you finally realize your own child has rewritten who you are. That night in the motel, wrapped in a scratchy polyester blanket, the TV dark, the rain ticking against the window like a metronome set to despair, I didn't sleep. I remembered. Not because I wanted to, but because silence always brings memory with it. And the memories that survive decades don't knock before they enter. I remembered who I used to be, who I still was, somewhere under all this grief and dust. Before I was a mother, I was a maker. My hands knew fabric like a second language. I could tell French silk from Italian chiffon by touch alone. I ran my own tailor shop in Providence for over 30 years. Eleanor's Stitchery, they called it, on Maple Street, right between the flower shop and that old bookstore that smelled like pipe smoke and secrets. I stitched wedding gowns for 3 generations of one family. I hemmed opera cloaks, theater costumes, christening robes, prom dresses. People came to me for the moments they'd remember forever. And I remembered Michael, my Michael. A high school literature teacher who smelled like peppermint and cedar, who read sonnets to me in the bathtub, who proposed with a silver thimble instead of a ring because he knew I'd wear that more often. We built a quiet life. We built James. Michael had a voice that carried calm, even when the world leaned sideways. When he got sick, he still read to me. He still made me laugh. And just before he died, lying in that hospital bed, he held my hand and said, "Ellie, keep the land in your name. If something ever happens, protect yourself." People change. I didn't argue. I never did when he spoke like that. After he passed, I did what he asked. We'd bought that property in Vermont together, a little fixer-upper with land that stretched out like open arms. After Michael died, I sold the shop in Providence and moved back to Vermont. James and Emily were already there, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could start over. I brought the deed with me. Kept it in a small lockbox at the bottom of my hope chest. Not because I was plotting anything, not because I didn't trust them, but because my husband had asked me to. James didn't take it well. At first, it was small things, passive comments at dinner about not being treated like family. Little jokes that weren't really jokes, like, "You still think I'm that teenager who stole $20 from your purse?" And then, slowly, the jokes stopped being jokes. One morning, we were sitting at the kitchen table. I had made coffee. I offered him the cream. He looked at me and said, You don't trust me, do you? You never have. You never saw me as a man. Just some obligation you carried too long. I didn't have words for that. Only silence. And he took my silence as guilt. Emily didn't help. She was always polite, but in that brittle, shiny way some women use when they're done pretending they care. She hugged me with her chin tilted high, praised my cooking as if it were an act of charity, and treated my presence in the house like an imperfection she couldn't quite sand away. But once the land became public knowledge, once James started grumbling to her that I held it too tightly, her quiet disdain turned into a story. She became the storyteller, and I became her villain. I overheard her one afternoon, voice sharp and careless in the next room, thinking I was outside. She lives for control, Emily said. She hoards property and trauma the way old people hoard pills. She's the mildew under our wallpaper. We're trying to live a modern life, and she's in the background with her dusty little apron and those judgmental eyes, like a bad smell we can't scrub out. That was the day I stopped baking for them. The day I realized I was no longer the quiet foundation they'd built on. I had become the crack in the wall they wanted to plaster over. Her friends started treating me like a tenant. They'd show up for dinner and give me condescending smiles. "Oh, hi Eleanor. Still here? How cute." One of them called me a legacy decoration right to my face, thinking I wouldn't understand. Emily laughed. The worst part was James. He said nothing. Even when he heard them. Even when I stood right there. He never corrected them, never told them to stop. Because deep down, I think he believed it too, that I was an embarrassment, a relic, a mistake they couldn't quite get rid of because it would look bad on paper. It was never just about the land. It was about the idea that I still had a kind of power they hadn't been given, that I still mattered in a way that complicated their picture-perfect life. And Emily, she was always more interested in pictures than people. Our house became her showroom. Every piece of furniture had a hashtag. She posted videos of redecorating the old woman's room, without ever saying my name. She changed the wallpaper in the hallway and called it detoxifying the energy. She even had the audacity to hang a glowing, oversized photo of her own mother in the living room after tucking away the only picture I had of Michael and me. When I asked where it went, she said, "Oh, it clashed." And just like that, my memories disappeared from the walls of my own home. Over time, they stopped inviting me to their dinners. They hosted parties without mentioning them. They laughed in rooms where I wasn't welcome. I became the sound of slippers in the hallway, a door that opened and shut too softly to count. I was disappearing in increments. And every time I tried to speak, to push back, I was called difficult. Dramatic. Too emotional. Emily told her friends I was rebranding victimhood as senior citizenship, that I was performing elderliness for sympathy points, that my vibe was outdated and depressing. I had become, in their story, the mother no one wanted to remember. And that's how they made it easier to forget they'd ever loved me, by convincing themselves I was never lovable to begin with. But I remembered. I remembered everything. I remembered who I was. And sitting there alone in that motel room, with the heater rattling beside me, I knew this. If they had rewritten my story, then it was time I wrote an ending of my own, one that didn't ask for permission, one that didn't wait for kindness. If they wanted me erased, they would have to learn what it meant to be written out themselves. The camera was no bigger than a coat button, tucked discreetly into the corner of the bookshelf in the hallway outside my room. I'd bought it online, paid cash at the pharmacy, and followed the instructions with trembling hands. I didn't tell anyone I'd installed it. I didn't need their permission. I needed proof. I never thought I'd live to see a day when I felt safer with surveillance. But when silence becomes strategy, evidence becomes protection. It started with small things going missing, my sewing scissors, a necklace Michael had given me, a box of letters I'd written but never sent. Then came the locked pantry, new labels on the food containers stamped for household use only. Emily's tone shifted too, like I was an employee who'd stayed past her usefulness, like a smell they couldn't quite scrub out of the curtains. James never said much, but his silence wasn't neutral. It was agreement, worn like a mask. And when I once told him I felt unsafe, his only answer was, "Maybe you're just too sensitive for the way the world is now." So I stopped talking. I started watching. The camera had been running for months, collecting grainy black and white snippets of life. I rarely checked the footage, just enough to swap the memory card and charge the battery. It wasn't until the week after they locked me out of my own home that I sat in the motel room, sipping weak coffee, and watched the clips in order. I didn't expect what I found. Halloween. Emily had hosted a party. Not a surprise, she loved curated chaos, but I hadn't known about this one. They'd told me they were visiting friends that weekend. I'd gone to bed early with a sore hip and woke to an empty house. But there it was on the screen. October 31st. The hallway full of unfamiliar laughter. High heels clicking across the hardwood. Voices shouting from the living room. I fast-forwarded. Then I saw her, Emily, wearing a gray curly wig and a long beige cardigan. One of mine. A plastic oxygen tube looped clumsily around her ears and into her nose. She walked with an exaggerated hunch. One arm bent at an awkward angle, the other dragging a broomstick wrapped in foil like a cane. She shuffled into view, muttering nonsense in a fake, quivering voice. Oh dear, where did I put my pills? James, did you take my heating pad again? This room smells like morality. The crowd behind her howled with laughter. Then James appeared on screen. My son. He held his phone up, recording her, smiling. No, beaming. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, Eleanor the mummy. Still won't die. Emily shrieked with joy, twirled around, fake coughed into a tissue, then dropped it on the floor and shouted, I used to be respected. Now I'm just mold in a cardigan. Someone off camera yelled, more like passive-aggressive taxidermy. James laughed so hard he doubled over. The video ended there. I stared at the laptop screen for a long time. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my bag, pulled out a blank DVD from the pocket of my coat, and burned the footage onto it. With neat handwriting, I labeled it, October 31st, hallway camera, 8:42 p.m. Then I slipped it into a slim plastic case and called the only person in town I trusted, Laura McIntyre. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and crisp like autumn leaves underfoot. Eleanor, sweetheart, what's going on? I asked if she could meet me discreetly. No questions yet. She said yes. We met at the church garden the next morning. It was empty except for two crows perched on the bench where we sat. I handed Laura the disc and said quietly, if anything happens to me, this is why. She looked me straight in the eye. They don't know who they're dealing with, do they? I smiled, but it didn't reach my cheeks. No, I said. They never cared to learn. After that, I walked back to the motel, slower than usual. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel every single step. The air smelled sharp, like pine and the promise of snow. Vermont always had a way of reminding you that beauty and bitterness could live side by side. Back in the motel room, I brewed another cup of weak coffee and sat on the bed, replaying that video in my head. Not because I wanted to relive it, but because I needed to study it. Every gesture, every laugh, every cruel little detail. They hadn't just mocked me, they'd crafted it. They'd rehearsed it. They'd made me a character in their little show. But they'd forgotten something. I was never background noise. I was never a prop. I had built that house with Michael, stitched every curtain, patched every chair. I had raised James under that roof, taught him to tie his shoes, wipe his nose, sound out his first words. Buried my husband with dignity and cooked every Sunday dinner for years afterward, even when nobody said thank you. I was the mortar between every brick they now lived inside. And they had the audacity to turn me into a Halloween joke, so cheap it wouldn't survive past a punchline. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought shame would keep me still. But shame is an old coat to women like me. We wear it until it frays, then we fold it away and slip into something stronger. That night, I wrote a list. I titled it Final Things. Update will. Retrieve original deed from safe deposit box. Call Ava Morales. Order transcripts from camera footage. Change everything. I set the pen down and looked at that last line. Change everything. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be loud. But it would be permanent. Because when people laugh at you like that, they're not laughing just to be cruel. They're laughing because they believe you can't do anything about it. And that's exactly when you must. So I folded the list, tucked it into my bra like a prayer, and whispered to the empty room. Eleanor the mummy, huh? Let's see who gets buried first. The first snowfall came on a Monday, quiet and unannounced. I woke to a world turned pale. Trees powdered white, rooftops dusted like sugar. The motel parking lot lay hushed beneath a thin layer of snow. Everything looked clean, untouched. But I knew better. That morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to the bank where Michael and I had opened our joint account 43 years ago. It was also where we'd rented a safe deposit box, box 117, bottom row, the key to which I'd worn on a chain around my neck since the day he died. Just in case, he'd said. The second call was to Ava Morales. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm but steady, older now, stronger. "Ms. Eleanor," she said, still using the old habit of respect. "I need to open a door I've kept closed too long," I told her. "And I need someone smart enough to stand beside me when I do." "I've been waiting 15 years for this call," she replied. I arrived at the bank just after noon. The manager still recognized me, his hair thinner, his tone more cautious. I presented the key, signed the forms, and followed him through 2 locked doors and down a narrow hallway into the vault. He knelt, unlocked the box, and stepped aside. "Take your time, Mrs. Carter," he said. I didn't rush. The metal drawer was heavier than I remembered. Inside sat a stack of yellowing documents, a small velvet pouch with my grandmother's earrings, a sealed envelope with my name in Michael's handwriting, and 1 folded sheet of thick, aged paper. I opened the letter first. It was dated April 12, 2009, 3 months before Michael died. "Eleanor, my love," it began. "If you're reading this, it means the world's gone a little colder, and it means I'm no longer beside you to keep it warm. I know you. I know you'll carry on quietly, maybe too quietly, so I'm leaving you something louder." Beneath it lay a notarized amendment to our original estate plan, something Michael had drawn up with an old friend at the courthouse in Richmond. It granted me full discretion to override the family inheritance if I ever experienced neglect, abuse, or abandonment at the hands of our heirs. It named no one specifically. It simply read, "In the event that Eleanor Jane Carter is treated without dignity, she shall be entitled to reallocate all assets as she sees fit." The assets included the house James now lived in, the adjoining rental property we had once leased to a local teacher, 7 acres of land up near Fairhaven where Michael had dreamed of building a community garden, and a retirement portfolio valued at just over $1.25 million. I folded the papers carefully, slipped them into my purse, and left the vault feeling 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older. That evening, I met Ava in her office above the bakery on Main Street. It was a modest space, old oak desk, law books stacked neatly on every shelf, a window looking out over the town square now dusted in snow. She looked up as I entered and smiled. "Still wear your hair the same way," she said. "And still walk like you own the place." "I used to," I replied. She poured tea without asking and gestured for me to sit. I handed her the documents and waited while she read. Her eyes didn't widen, her jaw didn't drop, but her fingers tightened around the paper. "This," she said slowly, "is enforceable." I nodded. "And the footage?" she asked. "I have copies, physical and digital, dated, time-stamped, and with witnesses. One, Laura McIntyre, and a nurse at the hospital who overheard the discharge call." She leaned back in her chair, hands folded under her chin. "I'll take the case. You don't owe me anything. You already paid me 15 years ago when you made my graduation dress for free, when my mama couldn't afford one, and you told her dignity should never come with a price tag." I stared at her for a long moment. "You remember that?" "I wore it like armor," she said softly. "I still have it in my closet." The silence between us was no longer empty. It was full of history, of purpose. Ava began laying out the plan methodically. We would file for a protective order based on elder abuse and emotional distress. We would submit the footage, the witness testimonies, and the letter from Michael as evidence. We would initiate a formal request to transfer all holdings into a new trust, one that excluded James and Emily entirely. "No court in Vermont will look kindly on what they did," Ava said, "especially not with video." I nodded again, this time with steel in my spine. "What do you want the new trust to do?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. I wanted to protect people like me. Women who've been quiet too long. Women told their value ends when their skin wrinkles and their usefulness fades. I wanted to be a weapon in the hands of the forgotten. Ava smiled. "Then we build you an arsenal." We signed the first batch of documents that night. I left Ava's office with a folder tucked under my arm and a kind of resolve that doesn't shiver, even in the cold. Back at the motel, I set the folder beside the television and sat on the edge of the bed. They had changed the locks, mocked my breath, my body, my age, but they had forgotten one thing. Michael had never stopped protecting me. Even from the grave, he had left me one final shield. And now, with Ava at my side, I would use it. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's sealed in an envelope, waiting for a woman brave enough to open it. The courthouse in Burlington was old enough to remember better days. Its wood-paneled walls held the ghosts of verdicts long past, and on the morning of my hearing, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and tension. I wore navy blue, not black. This wasn't a funeral. I had already buried the version of myself that begged to be let in. This was something else entirely, a quiet resurrection. Ava walked beside me, her heels clicking with purpose. She carried everything, our evidence, our witnesses, and something James and Emily never expected, the truth, neatly organized, bound in law. The courtroom was fuller than I'd imagined. Maybe it was curiosity, a woman my age standing up against her own blood. Or maybe it was Emily's circle of polished supporters, drawn by the scent of drama. Either way, they got their show. Just not the one they came for. James sat at the defendant's table, arms folded, jaw tight. He looked older than I remembered, not aged, but emptied. Emily sat beside him in a beige pantsuit that was too bright for the room, her hair perfectly styled, her face smooth but brittle. I could smell her perfume from where I sat, synthetic roses overwrought. The judge entered. Everyone rose. My hands stayed steady on the edge of the table. It began with Ava presenting the claim, elder abuse, emotional harassment, property exploitation. She spoke with precision, no theatrics, just clean, cutting truth. Then came the evidence. The courtroom dimmed as the screen flickered to life. In black and white, there she was, Emily, parading down the hallway in costume. My cardigan. A fake oxygen tank. A broomstick wrapped in foil, pretending to be a cane. Her voice squealed through the speakers. Oh dear, where did I put my pills? Laughter rippled through the video. Then James's voice, clear, cruel, unmistakable. Eleanor the mummy. Still won't die. A few gasps spread through the courtroom. Somewhere, a woman whispered, shameful. When the lights came back on, Emily had gone pale. James refused to look up. Ava continued. She presented my journals, months of entries in my handwriting, each one a small wound. Cold meals. Locked cabinets. Laughter behind closed doors. Parties I was never invited to in my own home. Then Laura took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. Her voice was steady. She came to my house that night, Laura said. Soaking wet. They'd changed the locks. Refused to let her in. That's not a misunderstanding. That's cruelty. The defense tried to spin it, called the footage a joke among friends, said I was confused, emotional, misremembering details. The judge cut them off. You're arguing her memory is unreliable while the video shows your clients mocking her existence? The room went still. After that, it was my turn. I stood. I didn't need notes. I spoke softly. I told the judge about the years I'd spent building that home, the sacrifices I made, the dignity I gave without ever asking much in return. I told them about the smell of bleach in the laundry room where my picture used to hang. About how silence, when it comes from your own child, can sound like a scream. I'm not here for revenge, I said, my voice steady. I'm here because I wanted on record that I was not invisible. That I was not irrelevant. That I was, and still am, someone worth respecting. The judge nodded. Then he called for recess. When we returned, the courtroom was silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. And then he spoke. In the matter of Eleanor Jane Carter versus James and Emily Carter, he began, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. James flinched. Emily blinked rapidly. Effective immediately, the judge continued, the defendants are ordered to vacate the primary residence and adjoining property within 21 days. The plaintiff retains full ownership and authority over said assets. Additionally, the court awards $300,000 in damages to Mrs. Carter for emotional and reputational harm. A no-contact order is issued, prohibiting the defendants from coming within 50 meters of Mrs. Carter's person, residence, or place of business. The courtroom exhaled as one. Emily fainted, collapsed in her chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. The bailiff rushed to her side, but I didn't move. I simply watched. James remained seated, head bowed, shoulders trembling. Not from tears. From something heavier, maybe realization, maybe shame, maybe just the long weight of consequence finally catching up. He said nothing. He didn't have to. I walked out of that courthouse taller than I had in years. Outside, snow had begun to fall again. Soft, steady, relentless. Ava handed me a copy of the judgment. "It's over," she said. "No," I replied. "It's only just begun." Because justice had spoken, not with fists, not with fury, but with truth. And for once, that was enough. The house was quiet when I returned. Not silent the way grief is silent, but peaceful, like an old quilt wrapping itself around your shoulders just right. They were gone. James and Emily had moved out 3 days before the court's deadline. No note. No apology. Just a set of designer coasters left on the kitchen counter, like one last insult. I dropped them into the trash without a word. I walked barefoot through every room, listening to the creaks, the echoes. The house felt bigger somehow, less full of ghosts, more full of breath. But I knew it would never be home again. Not the way it once was. Not the way Michael and I built it to be. So I made a decision. A week later, the papers were signed. I donated everything, the house, the land, the rental unit, the garden, to the Northern Vermont Women's Resilience Foundation. They specialized in transitional housing for elderly women escaping abuse or abandonment. The only center of its kind in the county. Their wait list stretched a mile long. Now, they had a home. I stood on the front porch, my porch, as the new sign was unveiled. Maison of Quiet Courage. The name was Ava's idea. Because what you did, she said, wasn't loud, but it was strong. And it was right. They gave me a small room of my own, sunlit, tucked near the back, where the hydrangeas used to bloom. I turned it into a workshop, a space for sewing, for baking, for teaching women like me how to write wills that would never be ignored again. Every Tuesday afternoon, we gathered at the long dining table. Some had bruises still fading. Some still couldn't meet your eyes. But all of them carried stories that no one had ever listened to, until now. I taught them how to bake ginger cookies from scratch. How to mend buttons. Stitch seams. Patch more than just fabric. I taught them how to keep records. How to document everything. How to make their names impossible to erase. Some stories brought tears. Others brought laughter. One woman even brought a cat. And week by week, the house began to hum again, not with cruelty, but with community. Outside these walls, though, the past was finally catching up with its karma. Within 2 weeks of the verdict, Emily launched a GoFundMe. She called it Starting Over after elder abuse accusations ruined my life. She posted carefully staged photos, her hair windblown just so, standing outside a thrift store with designer sunglasses tucked artfully into her collar. "I was misrepresented," she wrote. "We were all just trying to help Eleanor, but the media twisted everything. We were caregivers, not criminals." She raised $482 in the first 3 days. Then the clip resurfaced. Someone, probably from Ava's office, leaked the Halloween video online. It spread like frost on a windshield. Twitter, Reddit, TikTok, everywhere. Overnight, Emily went from misunderstood daughter-in-law to the woman who mocked her sick mother-in-law on camera, then begged strangers for money. The backlash was immediate. Her GoFundMe was flooded with comments. Mocking the elderly isn't cute, Emily. Eleanor the mummy? More like Emily the bully. Hope that costume keeps you warm when karma kicks in. Within 48 hours, the fundraiser was shut down, reported for fraud. James didn't fare much better. Word spread fast that he'd been evicted by his own mother, that he'd lost $1.2 million in assets because he laughed at her illness. He tried applying for a job at a real estate firm, but one of the interviewers had seen the video. They never called him back. The internet even gave him a nickname, Mama Evicta. Memes followed. One showed a Halloween mummy holding a deed. Another had James's face photoshopped onto a Monopoly board with the caption, "Do not pass go. Do not collect inheritance." I didn't laugh. But I didn't feel sorry either. Because accountability doesn't need vengeance, only truth. Sometimes justice is just letting the world see who people really are, and allowing the consequences to land where they belong. Back at Maison of Quiet Courage, we were getting ready for winter. The women were knitting scarves, and I was teaching a few of them how to make pecan pie from scratch. One of them, June, a sharp-tongued former librarian, offered to help me organize my journals. Together, we turned the upstairs study into a library. Not of books, but of testimonies. Handwritten accounts of abandonment. Recordings of gaslighting. Court documents. Screenshots. Photographs. All dated, labeled, preserved. We called it the Room of Remembering. Because forgetting is how abuse survives, and remembering is how we end it. My room was simple. A bed. A rocking chair. A wall of framed photographs. Michael holding baby James, me standing outside my old shop in Providence, our wedding photo from 1963, a picture of Ava in her graduation dress, and one of Laura and me laughing, taken just last month. James never reached out. Emily tried, once. Sent an email that read like an apology but wasn't, full of phrases like misunderstanding and hurt feelings on both sides. I marked it as spam. Because closure isn't always a door slamming shut. Sometimes, it's walking into a new room and realizing no one else has the key but you. On the last night of autumn, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my knees and a mug of tea in my hands. The snow hadn't come yet, but I could feel it coming. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread its arrival. The wind smelled like forgiveness, but not the kind you give to others. The kind you keep for yourself. And as I looked at the lights glowing in the windows, listened to the laughter drifting out from inside, the laughter of women who once thought they had nowhere left to go, I whispered something I hadn't said aloud in years. I'm home. And this time, no one could lock me out. She was young, early 20s. Respectful, but nervous. A recorder in one hand, a notebook in the other. Elena Ramos, local journalist, writing a story about elder resilience. Someone had told her about Maison of Quiet Courage. About me. I'm honored you agreed to speak with me, she said, settling into the chair across from me on the porch. Don't flatter me yet, I told her. You haven't asked anything hard. She smiled and started with the easy questions, about the Maison, the workshops, the mission. I gave her the polished answers about dignity, about reclaiming silence. Then she leaned forward, her voice gentler. Do you ever think about your son? About Emily? I sipped my tea. Every time I smell bleach, I said, and feel nothing. She blinked. Do you want them to apologize? No, I said. I want distance. I want silence. I want to live without having to explain why I deserve not to be mocked. She closed her notebook. Can I ask one more thing? Off the record. What did you put in your will? I looked out at the snowy field, the wind nudging the chimes just outside the porch. I made it simple, I said. The Maison goes to the foundation. My journals to Ava, for posthumous release. My thimble, the one Michael gave me instead of a ring, to Leah, the girl who stitched her first pillow with trembling hands. And I left one message, handwritten, inside the safe. I paused. If one day they end up on someone else's doorstep, if they knock with apologies rehearsed, I hope it's not the door of another mother who knows how to keep records. Elena sat there in silence, then whispered, That's the coldest and most powerful thing I've ever heard. It's not cold, I said. It's clear. There's a difference. She left soon after. Her article was kind. She called it The Mother Who Refused to Disappear. It spread quietly, like all true stories do. I declined interviews. Stayed in the workshop. Baked pies. Folded fabric. Watched the women around me grow louder, stronger. Sometimes the phone rang. I never answered. Once, there was a voicemail. James. His voice cracked. Mom, I don't know who I am anymore. I thought I did, but I don't. I miss something. I don't know if it's you, or just the way things used to feel. No apology. Just, I hope you're okay. I really do. I deleted it. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who's lost is not hand them a mirror, but let them walk without one, until they find their own reflection. That winter's last snow blanketed the house like a secret. I stood at the window, sipping tea, watching the path vanish beneath the white. And I thought, I am not erased. I am rewritten. And every word is my own. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've been through something like this, share your story in the comments.